Hi, welcome to the Inspiration of Painting. Well, today I'm going to throw you for a loop. We're going to do a little basic drawing in the next couple of sessions just to kind of introduce some of you to some techniques for creating form that a lot of you struggle with in your painting techniques. Now, I know that most of you want to paint and want to get all the color and have a lot of fun with your canvas and brushes, but it's real important that you understand some very important truths about painting. And first of all, there is a saying that your painting is only as good as your drawing. Well, there's a lot of truth to that. Many of you have mastered painting techniques, but when you get into drawing form or creating a shape or wanting something specific like a bird or an animal or a bucket or a barrel, any of these forms, you have a struggle with it because you can't create it on your canvas. So what I'm going to do is give you at least some basics on how to create form before you ever get to your canvas. And then when you do get to your canvas, all you got to do is take your charcoal and sketch it, and then your painting technique then takes over. So for those of you that are interested, I just have a simple newsprint pad here and a piece of soft vine charcoal. And that's all we're going to do. Or you may want to just sit and take notes because you can make some little rough sketches and then practice these things later on. Basically what we're going to do is a series of fundamentals and some exercises so that you can practice on your own. And this is what you'll get in any major fine art course in any of the top art schools in the country. Just some of these basics. First of all, let's run through the 4 basic shapes. Most of you that had a little training early on in life probably got some of these, but I've met so many people all over the country that have never had any experience even with the 4 basic shapes. So I just want to quickly go through that. The first shape we have, and I'll tell you what, let's back up for just a minute. I want to just say one thing. There is a difference between sketching and drawing. Whenever you're sketching, you're using a lighter, more, you might say, free-flowing stroke. Whenever you're drawing, you're actually fine-tuning a sketch, okay? So for example, when we get ready to draw the 4 basic shapes, what I do is I let my 3 fingers here rest on the paper, and before I ever make a stroke, I get going in the direction that I'm going to make the first shape, which is, you're wrong, it's not a circle, it is a sphere, S-P-H-E-R-E. Now a sphere takes on the effect of all kinds of things. It can become a circle, it can become anything you want it to be. But the technical term is the sphere. Now in a moment we're going to shade these things, but first of all, get the shape. The second of the 4 basic shapes is what we call, let's see if you can guess this one. No, it is not a triangle, it is a cone. This is the second of the 4 basic shapes. Now the third of the 4 basic shapes also takes on a form of the sphere. No, it's not a tin can, it's a cylinder. Okay. And the final of the 4 basic shapes in all drawing is, no, it's not a square. We simply will call it a rectangle. Okay, now out of this rectangle, you can create squares or cubes or anything because you can stretch a rectangle or you can bring it back down to any size. So let's go ahead and make a very quick cube for the purpose of shading here in just a moment. Now, after you have established the fact that there are 4 basic shapes, and that's what every form in the whole universe is made of, are these 4 basic shapes. I don't care if you're doing people or animals or trees or whatever. Everything in the world, almost everything on my drawing table here, on my table, is made up from these 4 basic shapes. I don't care if it's a cup full of water, I don't care if it's a roll of paper towels, if it's a tube of paint, whatever it is created from these basic shapes. Now how do we get to that point? We'll do that in a moment, but first of all let's talk about shading. Okay? Now if you're taking notes, shading takes on 3 different phases. You have 3 values of shading. You have what we call the dark side, the middle value, and the light side. So on every one of these forms, you're going to have a dark, a middle, and a light. That's what creates form. All right? The first thing we're going to do is shade the sphere. Now, as it stands, it's just a simple line in the form of a circle. But if you want to make it look like a round ball or something that you can pick up and throw, here's how we begin. You take your charcoal, and first of all, you establish the dark side. Really apply heavy pressure. All right? Now the reason, by the way, we're using charcoal is because it's soft and easy to manipulate, easy to shade with. Now you can use pencil or pen and ink. You can use any kind of medium you want to. But let's start with charcoal. You apply heavy pressure. As you come across, you lighten the pressure to create the middle value. And as you come on across, you just barely skim the surface to get the lighter value. Then you take your finger and you go in sort of a circular motion, blending the values together. Now I want you to notice what's happening here. You can actually eliminate the other side of this circle or this ball. And if you properly shaded this thing, your eye will continue to go around even without the other line in place. Because if you shaded properly, and the secret behind creating form is getting your eye to follow whatever shape you did by the shadows you use or the highlights. So now we've got the dark value. We've come over and slightly underneath. So this automatically makes your eye go right on up around, even without the other side being visible. Now, this could be anything. This could be a baseball, a basketball, an apple, an orange. It could be anything. And then you start applying the textures and all the highlights and the little things that actually make that particular form. Let's establish a light source. Coming in from the right-hand side, we're going to have sunlight. So every object that has a shadow obviously is going to have a shadow on the ground. So there's two types of shadows. You have what we call here the form shadow. That's the shadow on the edge of the object that creates the form. The shadow on the ground or wherever is called a cast shadow. So for instance, let's put a shadow here. And it starts right underneath and goes right out at an angle. And that's called the cast shadow. Okay, so if you're taking notes, and I really highly recommend that you take a good set of notes and keep these forever. I've been in this all my life, and I've never learned more than I did in the very beginning of my career when all the basics came out, and I finally started realizing over the years how important they were. Most of us don't want to learn the basics. We want to dive into painting and forget it. But you always get stuck, and then you wonder, and you always have to start back from the beginning. Well, this is the beginning. You could do this in paint if you want to get a canvas and draw your circle and make a form out of it. Then you have a sphere. All right, the next object is a cone. It's a simple matter now of taking this cone and just simply shading it like we did the sphere. So, first of all, on the left-hand side, just like with the sphere, you put a very dark stroke, and as you come across, you lighten the pressure until you've created a very three-dimensional object. Blow off the excess dust, and with your finger eliminate any hard lines. And by the way, that's why we call it sketching. See, sketching is best if you use very light lines that almost don't show up. That's why we could get this in here and it looks like a ball. You don't really need this other edge over here real effectively. It just needs to be a suggestion. Then you take your finger, and with the same technique we used over there, you roll it in a circular motion, blending the values together, and you have a cone that looks rounded. All right? Now, keep in mind, this is the dark value, this is the middle value, and this is the light value. Every object has to have all three values to have its correct form. Same thing here with the shadow. Draw in the basic shape of it, shade it in, and there you have it. Doesn't matter if you're going to be a commercial illustrator, a finely tuned fine artist, or a portrait painter, or whatever you are, a cartoonist. Any of those things require the basics of form. Okay? Now, the next thing we're going to shade is our cylinder. Now, what's interesting about the cylinder is that it's hollow inside. So we're going to have a little different lighting situation. The light's still coming in from the right, and shading is pretty simple on the outside. So let's do that first. So what's the rule? You apply heavy pressure, get a very, very dark outer edge, and as you come across, you lighten the pressure until you've created a softer, more undefinite edge, and get rid of that hard line over there. Then you take your finger, once again, and you lightly go in a circular motion, softening and blending the three values together. Just barely. Don't rub too hard or you'll eliminate some of the value. If you use different types of charcoal pencils, different hardnesses of pencils, you can create a lot of different shades. But with charcoal, it's easy to blend. All right? Now, with our light coming in from the right-hand side, the right-hand side of the object will block the light from entering the can on that side. So this will be the dark side. And all I'm going to do is darken this. As I go across, I lighten the pressure. Now it looks like you can see inside the can. Now you take your finger and gently blend the colors together, or the values, until once again you've got a soft edge. There's no hard lines where one shadow begins or the one value begins and the other ends. Now you can always go back and sharpen an edge where it's needed, like if you need to here, but it's not always necessary. You can see down inside the can, this edge isn't as important as it is on that edge. Now this can take on all kinds of shapes. It soon can become a roll of paper towels. It can become anything you want. It could be part of a tree trunk. And this is the basic form we use for that kind of thing. Now the rectangle is a little different ball game. Keep in mind that these other three objects are rounded. Okay? So there's no hard edges anywhere. They are their own. They just all blend together. With a rectangle, you have definite edges that stop and start. And that's because it's a square. It's got a sharp corner where light cannot get around it. Okay? It can only hit the surface that it's on. Well, all we can do is estimate approximately where the light's going to be and what the values are. I'm going to suggest that the left side of the box be the dark value, the top of the box be the light value, and the side of the box be the middle value. Now, basically what you're getting into here, I'm going to soften my sketch by just rubbing it like this. We know that this will be the dark side, so the whole edge of the box will be dark. Now try not to use too many real hard lines. You can use a hard line to get it established, but be sure you fade it in. I use the side of the charcoal often because it's easy to cover a large area. Okay? Now, that's the dark value. This is a good exercise for you because now, to get the middle value, you have to lighten the pressure. On the top of the box, it's very light. Just barely touch it. And in this case, you can soften it even more just by using your finger. Now the front of the box will have the middle value, and that's a little bit darker than the light one and a little lighter than the dark one. But it should be a fairly even value right across the front of the rectangle. Okay. Now you can take your finger and kind of gently soften these colors together all over the front. And now you have a box for what it's worth. It can be, use it for building houses or whatever. that's got three values. You've got the dark, the light, and the middle. Okay? Now, because this is basically a painting course, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on all the little ins and outs of this, but I think it's important that you get the basics. So get these down on paper, put them in your notepad, and then we'll move on to the next phase of basic drawing, and that is how to transform these basic shapes into actual shapes in real life. Okay? So now we go to the next page, and we have some exercises here that are very important for you to understand. We're going to do a series of ovals. Now I'm going to do this quickly just because I want you to get it on paper and study it. A lot of people struggle whenever they're in a painting class and we're doing a painting with a lot of objects, and it may have some old buckets or barrels, it may have a wagon wheel, it may have anything that's got an oval shape to it. So many people struggle with that. Well, let me show you the trick and an easy way to learn how to create the oval effect so that you can get like the tin can or anything you want. If you would, remember these three fingers are the ones that control your sketching ability, okay? Here's where most of us go wrong. We get this charcoal or a pencil and we hold it like a pencil, like we're writing a letter, and we get up here and we start sketching like this. That's not sketching. I'm not real sure what you call it, but it's not sketching. Sketching is a loose, free movement like this, okay? So now I'm going to make some ovals at a right-hand angle. You should be able to make these ovals where they're almost perfect, okay? So do several of them. In fact, I'm going to suggest you do page after page after page after page of these until you're really good at creating ovals in a right direction, and then you learn. This is the biggest problem, is that not everyone can do things left and right, and you need to learn to do that. If you really are serious about your painting, you need to be somewhat ambidextrous with your hand. You need to be able to draw left and you need to be able to draw right. So turn back this way. Now here's what happens if you slow down. There's no way in the world, unless you have a lot of experience, that you can really get a perfect oval. You always get a crooked edge or a point that's not there. Do it quickly. This is the technique that a professional sketch artist uses to sketch in anything from portraits to figures to whatever. Now you have your right angle oval, you have your left angle oval. Now you need to have your exactly vertical oval, which is up and down, like this. Okay? Now, not to waste a lot of time, because if you're just joining us and you're seeing us drawing a bunch of circles, you probably think we've lost our mind. But a good artist will do this and learn it until you've got it really inside you. It just should be second nature to you, okay? So that's one exercise to learn how to become a good drawer or sketcher. Next thing we're going to learn how to do that I think is one of the most helpful and most effective exercises in drawing is how to do a tree with one stroke, okay? Trees are sort of my favorite thing to paint anyway, and I like to teach it, but it's also a great tool for learning. Now watch what we do here with a piece of charcoal. This is really an exciting thing. Beginning at the bottom of the paper, you take your piece of charcoal, and by the way, you don't want a piece that's too big. I'd say about 1 inch long or so, maybe a little longer. You start by tipping it up. I don't know if you can see this or not, but I'm tipping it up, so you should be able to manipulate this piece of charcoal in any direction you want, creating all kinds of thin lines, thick lines, or whatever. Starting at the bottom, apply heavy pressure. Now watch this develop, and as you go up, you be kind of jerky. Some of you have a little bit of nervous condition when you paint. This ought to work out just fine. Now notice what happens. As you go up the canvas or the paper, you've created some in and out, backwards, and just kind of give it a nice composition. Now, after you've got the basic tree in there, then you start locating places where the next limb will go. First of all, however, try to come on down here and get the width of the trunk. Okay, so let's make it about this wide. Then up here, like say right here for instance, I want a tree limb to come off. Well, I'm going to create some little circles. Again, getting back to the basic shapes. And by the way, that's all this tree is constructed of, are one of the four basic shapes. Can you guess which one it is? You're right, it's the cylinder. If I were to take this tree and go in here and, just for the sake of teaching you here, break this up, that's a cylinder, and the next section is a cylinder. Each section of this tree, because it's a rounded form, if you cut it, you notice a log, you see a flat top and a flat bottom, looks like a cylinder, okay, until you split it up and make firewood out of it or whatever you do with it. That's one of the basic shapes. Okay, going on up the tree here, we locate a spot where we want the next main limb to come off, and you create a little bit of an oval shape, like so. And that's where you're going to make this limb come in. Now watch this very carefully. Okay? Now after you got that limb out, to make it look attached, like it's in the front of the tree, you put a couple little lines around it, like so. Now see how that makes it look like it's attached? That's called foreshortening. Now, before we go any further, let me explain foreshortening to you, because so many of us don't understand foreshortening. Foreshortening is taking an object and turning it towards you so that you're looking more or less straight at it. For instance, if you a wagon wheel, now I'll come back to this in just a second, but I'm going to give you a sample. If you look at a wagon wheel turned flat against you, it looks like this. Okay, with all the spokes and everything in order. Okay? If you turn it sideways and create a sideways view or a more view straight on, it's called foreshortening. Anytime you take an object and turn it from its form of facing you to a sideways, then it takes on this form. And then you've got a whole different set of rules for building your wheel. Okay? You've got the rim that comes on the outside and on the inside. Everything then takes on a whole different effect. You foreshorten something when you take it and turn it sideways. Okay? Now, this is what I really want you to concentrate for your homework and a lot of practice. Get this tree now to where you can concentrate on building it without a whole lot of sketch work. For example, now I'm going to come up here and I'm going to make another limb coming off. It's not as big. There could be a limb coming off the back side. And on up the top here. This helps you in your painting techniques too, and manipulating your brush, creating different shapes, different forms, different compositions. I'm not sure, but I think we talked about negative space once before in our composition class, but this is a good time to talk about it again. It's the space around each object. Anywhere you have a space between something, that's called negative space, and you want to make it interesting, okay? So as you develop your tree, you want to make it interesting. Now, you've roughed in the tree. Oh, there may be let's say a forked limb that comes out from it down here, which is fine. It'll come up in underneath. May have some limbs coming up behind it. You know, you may have a real interesting tree here that has a lot of limbs coming up. But keep in mind now, in order for this tree to really do its thing, you've got to have the three values: the dark, the middle, and the light. You can't just have a dark and a light. So now we come back to our tree. And by the way, just again, as usual, we're running out of time. You can add little tree stumps. You can add broken spots. For instance, see this little spot right here? Remember our cylinder? You know how it is when it's broken off. It usually looks like that. So there you've had a good chance to use your cylinder to create a little broken stump. Okay? Now, let's darken or put a heavier stroke on this side to get the side of the tree really dark. Now you can have little things sticking out here and there. Then you take your finger and you go ahead and you soften this and work your way over until you've got all three values. Now remember what we talked about earlier, that you don't have to have the other side showing in order for your eye to follow. Now you know by looking at this that this tree is round because we've got three values. But it's more artistic if you leave the line off. For instance, a lot of people will come in here, and I'm going to ring part of this just on purpose. But if I come back over here and I put a hard line right there, see how that throws off the balance of the tree? All of a sudden, it's no longer a piece of art. It becomes more of an illustration, something that needs a lot of lines to tell the story. A true artist uses form, uses shading to tell the story, okay? That's how you create the look of the painting. So, okay, over here we darken this. Say, for instance, you want to have some roots coming out at the bottom of this. Well, look what we can do here. On the foreshortening, you use some of the circles, starting up kind of high like this. Okay. Take that and you blend it up into the tree. Okay, so you've got a trunk now that's got some roots coming out at the bottom of the tree that you can insert down into the ground, and then you can pull up your grasses and rocks, and pretty soon you have a tree that's very, very interesting. Not to say now that you can't go back in any given place on the tree and add some little smudges where it looks like the bark is, or there's holes or cracks, but you don't have to have the entire side of the tree outlined with another line. Well, once again, we're running out of time, and I'm really excited to have an opportunity to show this to you. So what I'd like for you to do now is take your charcoal and concentrate on building form by using the 3 values. Do the 4 basic shapes, do trees, do anything in your house. Just look around, find things that will work for you. Thanks for joining us today. God bless you, stay inspired, and we'll see you again on the Inspiration of Painting. Hi, welcome back to the Inspiration of Painting. Well, we're going to continue a little bit with our basic drawing. Now, just a quick refresher for those of you that didn't get to see our last program. We're going to, every once in a while, throw in some basic drawing, composition, design, and perspective throughout the series, just because we need to know basics, okay? So one of the things I want to quickly review is that the 4 basic shapes are what everything in the world are constructed from. We learned that last time. We learned a little bit about shading. We learned some techniques for exercises for creating control in drawing, and one of the key things is the oval technique, right angled ovals, left angled ovals, and vertical ovals, learning how to do them so that they are near perfect and in a very sketchy form. Then we moved into our sketching our trees, learning how to create the form of the tree and getting the thick and thin lines by using the 3 values, the dark, the middle, and the light value. So those are some of the things we learned last time. And just simply by the fact that we only have a few minutes to work on these programs, I want to quickly now dive into another area of drawing that is very critical for all of us to understand, because especially if you're a painter, there are 3 basic ways to shade a drawing or a painting. And I'm going to just do these quickly. We're going to use the basic shape, the sphere, because it's the easiest one and the quickest one. Now again, I'm sketching. Now sketching, again, remember, is very light. You just barely want to see the shape. And the first technique for shading is called scumble. S-C-U-M-B-L-E. Now that is a real technical term. I don't know how they came up with it, but you'll see that's kind of what it looks like. Scumbling is just a whole array of lines that go every direction. A lot of freedom in the scumble technique, but when you're doing fur or hair or any kind of thing like that, this is a great technique, and here's how you do it. We'll let our light source come in from the right. We will use the 3 values, the dark, the middle, and the light, but instead of just the solid shading like we did in the beginning, we're going to use scumbling. Now watch how we do this. It takes a little more control to create the outer edge, but it's a lot of fun because you don't have to have much control in here. Except that now as you go across, you lighten your pressure, and the little gaps that we are now closing up will begin to open up, and you'll create more light coming through, and you'll see what I'm saying here. You apply heavier pressure, And pretty soon you're going to have a ball that looks round, believe it or not, at all these squiggly lines. If you understand a little bit about what you're doing, you will have something that looks three-dimensional. But this is called scumbling. Now, remember, to create form, you have to have a dark value, a middle value, and a light value. We just came out of the dark value. We are now moving into the middle value. And in just a moment, we will be moving into the light value by simply applying lighter pressure and having more space between all of the strokes. See, as I go across, I've just gently touched the paper, creating a very basic form. That's called scumbling. You use that technique in a lot of things in painting or drawing to create texture and so forth and so on. You can have your shadow over here. You can even scumble the shadow. And now you've created the scumble technique for shading. Now that's a lot of fun. It's easy and relatively, it's quick. Now the next one is a little bit more difficult because we're going to use what we call the crosshatch or the patchwork technique. Again, using our basic shape, the sphere, which is the most common thing to practice with when you're learning things. Again, very light. The patchwork or the crosshatch technique is built on a lot of overlapping lines, and here's how that works. You use lines that overlap each other. They can go any direction. There's no set pattern for the direction. Just remember that you've got to curve the patchwork to fit the shape of whatever object. It doesn't matter if you're doing portraits. This is, by the way, a very common technique when it comes to doing illustration, when it comes to creating texture like on the bark of a tree. It's great for creating, it's a wonderful pen and ink technique, but we use variations of this technique in our painting. And again, I know this is basically a painting program, but I've had so many comments about, well, I can't do this or I can't do that. It's always because they have no foundation. Now, these are all straight overlapping lines. Now, again, notice the dark value is heavy pressure and all the little holes are closed up so that you can't see light through them. As you come across the object, not only do you lighten pressure, but to get the middle value, you have more space between each line. This creates a middle value. Now, I don't know if you understand or not the system here, but whenever a printer prints something, it's done with a series of dots. And the more space between each dot, the lighter that color or that value becomes. And this is a similar principle. Now see, as you go across, you become very sporadic. The lines don't make a whole lot of sense. But it's got to be gradual. This is where a little bit of skill comes in. So it's amazing in a way that you can make a round object look round and have form by using square shapes. Okay? All right, now you've cross-hatched. This is called cross-hatch. Okay? Now, the next one is really, now with the first one we did, if you remember in our last program, was we used what we call block shading. Let me flip back and just make sure that you understand the difference. Block shading was where we took the side of the charcoal and we just used a solid blocking of shading and we took our finger and blended it. Here you don't use a blending tool, you don't use your finger or anything else to blend with. You use the end of your object to create the value system. Okay, so there's several ways that you can learn to shade. The next one is probably one of the most common forms of shading besides the block shading, and There's not really a technical term for it, but again we start with our sphere, one of the basic shapes. And by the way, just for practice and for your own benefit, you really should practice doing all of the 4 basic shapes with all of the different types of shading. That will really help improve your ability to paint and do other things in your work. The next one is where you just simply use lines. This is linear shading, okay? And what you do with linear shading is very similar to what you do with the patchwork, except you don't have as much overlap. There is some overlapping because as you curve around the subject or your object, they have a tendency to do that. But now you look at the shape of your object, and here you just use lines. I'm going to get in a little different position here. Lines are all you use. You can use long ones or short ones. But just remember that as you go across, the closer they are together and the heavier the pressure, the darker it is. So you have your dark value. And then as you come across, you lighten the pressure, a little more space between each line. And then you can create all your values. Take your finger to kind of soften the edge. Now you can go back and put some little details on correcting the shape. And I might make a little comment here, sort of a trick. In order to make something look really round, if you'll tuck the shadow underneath a little bit, like we've done here, like we've done here, that makes your object become a little bit more rounded. So what I'm going to do is just take this just like that. And that gets your eye moving on around the rest of the ball. Now, in some cases, like here, I want a little bit stronger middle value. I will go ahead and add a little bit more. And then I let my eye continue on around. So now you have scumble, crosshatch, and linear shading. Those are the 3, or actually 4 if you count the block shading. Those are the 4 basic types of shading. Use those consistently all the time, okay? Now that you understand that, let's draw a couple of objects, okay? Now, the first thing we're going to do are some simple objects. And I think to make it really interesting, let's do us an old wooden barrel. You know, an old keg, a whiskey keg or a nail keg or something like that, pickle barrel. Well, to start with, we have to have our cylinder, okay? So you can see how you can start with the basic shape and turn it into something. Well, start first of all with one of the ovals that I've tried to get you to practice drawing, and this time you need one that's laying flat on the ground. So you draw your oval. You sketch it lightly so that it's just barely visible. Then you draw some parallel lines in a vertical fashion, up and down like this, very, very loose. On the bottom part, you put the same curve that you have here, and if it's easy for you, go ahead and make an oval. And then you can just erase the back line, which would be inside. So now you've got this line, and you've got a top and bottom that match the angle. Now, if you want to get an old barrel, the next thing, now that you've got both sides of your cylinder established, it's a little bit easy now to just take the top of your cylinder and the bottom and draw or sketch the outer edge of the barrel on that side. Now notice you've got a certain amount of space and a certain form there, sort of a half moon. Well, one way to help you get it correct is just to get the same basic effect on this side. Now let me tell you what this is called. This is called the negative space rule. This is space that we use to create form. Remember, that's what's the object around. So we're trying to create this moon shape. That's the negative space. So you want the same type of negative space over here. All right? Now, if you've got that pretty close, then you can take your barrel and you can erase these lines. And so now by using one of the basic shapes, you've been able to get a fairly accurate barrel shape. Now this is where your talent begins to take over, or your imagination. I want to give this thing some form, okay? And usually there's some wooden slats, you know, that are made out of wood. So let's decide how we're going to do that. First of all, establish the middle, which is right here. Very lightly draw a line down the middle, just enough to see it. Now on each side of that line, you're going to begin the movement or the shape of each piece of wood. Over here, it's going to be slightly curved. And as it goes on around, it becomes more of a curve to match the curve of the shape over there. Do the same thing if you were drawing a pumpkin or anything that has lines. The middle one is usually facing you straight on, so it's straight, vertical. The rest of them will begin gradually to take on the form of the outer shape. Okay, so as you get to that point, this line and this line will generally be pretty much the same. Now you've established that. The next thing you're going to establish is the bands that hold it together. Now they have to have the same basic shape as the top and the bottom of the barrel. So you're going to sketch those in lightly. And you can make them just a little bit of width there, like that. There's a band. You can have 3 or 2, I don't really care. And your barrel can have different shapes. It can be tall and thin, or it can be real fat like this one. This must be a, I don't know, maybe it's a pickle barrel. Okay, then you've got one at the bottom. Now you've got your basic barrel shape, okay? Now if you were painting this, say you had a painting going and you had an old ghost town or something, and you want to place this barrel or a bucket, well, you've got the painting in there. All you do is take your charcoal and you get the rough sketch in there, and by having some experience, it's easy to sketch it because now you're ready to paint it. All right? Well, the first thing we're going to do is the inside of the barrel, and that's like our cylinder. It's light's coming in this direction, so the back side of it is going to be darker on the inside. So let's go ahead and start with the darkening like this. And as you go across, very lightly apply pressure until it becomes the light value. Now you can see in the barrel. Okay? Now, to get the dark side, let's start like we always did. And by the way, this charcoal can be divided up into little pieces, and I'm going to shorten a piece so I can have a little more room here. As a matter of fact, you can make your charcoal to fit some of the shapes you want it to be. For instance, the width of each piece of wood, I'll start over here on the outer side, and I'm going to go right down to the band with one stroke there, stroke there, stroke there, stroke there. That's the first one. Now, as you go across, each one gets a little bit lighter. This one will be pretty similar, really, because it's still on the dark side, but the next one and the next one, a little bit lighter. Okay, so as you come on across, everything gets lighter and lighter. Lighter. And the middle one has got basically the transition from middle tone to light pretty much is in the middle of the barrel where the middle piece of wood is. Now again, if your sketch is too heavy, you can always go back with a kneaded eraser or something and begin erasing a little bit, but we try not to do much erasing. Now I'm going to establish a little more darkness over here. Because I want just a little bit more value on the dark side, a little bit more here. And by adjusting the pressure on your charcoal, you can honestly create the little space between each one. So you can automatically create the little lines where the two butt up together. Now, on the bands, keep in mind that again, they're lighter over here, they're darker over here. So if you want to break your charcoal to fit the shape of it, fine, but also keep in mind that it goes out beyond slightly. And I'm going to just go ahead and darken this real dark. Then as I go across, I'm going to lighten the pressure just a little bit. And because we know that it goes inside over there, you put just a little hook like there so it looks like you can see around it. Do the same thing up here on this one. Goes across. Same thing up here on this one. Got a little inner hook right there where you can see it going around. Now, after you've got the basics of the barrels done, then you can start adding little details. For instance, maybe you want a crack. Maybe this is kind of split right there. Or maybe it's just an old dried out barrel and it's just about had it. You can begin adding little details. You can even come in here with a little knot and kind of suggest a few little pieces of wood, the wood grain or something like that. Just begin adding minor details just to create interest. Maybe the bottom part of here's got a big chunk out of it. Part of your job as an artist is to make things interesting. Just an old wooden barrel. A few dark lines for contrast, a few little knot holes here and there for interest. And the next thing you know, you've got an old wooden pickle barrel or whatever you want to call it. And of course, if you were really putting this into something where it needed to be extremely detailed, you'd spend a lot more time finishing it. But this is the basics. Then you've got your shadow over here. And now it's there with its shadow, and it may be sitting on an old porch, the corner of a porch here, and it may have wooden slats coming out, maybe the corner of there's a fence post back here. The point is, when you're drawing and painting, it's a good idea to understand why things do what they do, because most of us could never form a barrel without some basic instruction, okay? Now, let's move on to another quick object, and then we're going to be just about out of time, and it'll be up to you to go and practice these things and try painting and drawing all kinds of different things from your own area. Now, the next one that I really enjoy drawing, and it just seems to be something that I like to do for practice, is an old bucket. Now, we did the barrel, but the bucket is a lot of fun because it creates a lot of different effects. For instance, let's do one that's turned sideways, okay? So now you've got an oval here, like one of the right angled ovals we spoke of. And by the way, depending on how turned towards you something is, will have a lot to do with how wide the oval is. See, it can be in different degrees. Okay, so now I'm going to have this bucket, or maybe it's a bunch of apples that's going to be coming out of this thing, who knows. You've got this wooden bucket, or maybe it's a bushel basket. Okay, keeping in mind, again, we're sketching very, very lightly. And sometimes you have to stand back and get the shape right. Who knows what you're going to do with this? We again have sun coming in this direction. We're going to have a lot of darkness inside the bucket. We're going to have the wooden bands or the staves again like we had on the barrel. But you can practice those things from using the barrel. But watch what happens now if you wanted to have, say, an apple or something. Okay, your apple will start with a basic shape. What basic shape is it? That is the the sphere. So you start with the sphere first, and then you come in here and you decide to get your shape. You always take the basic shape and transform it into whatever object you want it to be. So you've got and by the way, we'll put a couple of leaves on here. Can you suggest to me the basic shape you might use or that it might be in relation to those leaves. You're right, it's the cone. Okay, now watch what happens when we do the apple. We put the dark value on first, okay? Now we leave a little highlight up there because you know the apple has a little highlight on it, maybe part of the coloration. You highlight or shadow as you come around like this. As you come across, just like on the rest of them, you take your finger, roll around like this. Maybe the bottom of the apples could be a little darker. It's okay. You can actually draw in just suggestions of where the little highlights are. You know, some of the little apples have, you know, you can put little dots where maybe it's been scarred or bruised or whatever. Got a little texture. And what you can do with this basic shape is turn it all directions like you did the bucket. Now you got the basic shape there. So what you can do here is have apples or pears or grapes. But you go ahead and block in all the basic shapes wherever you think they belong, overlapping each other. And then you come in and you transform each one of those shapes into the object. For instance, this apple may be leaning sideways. So you go ahead, keep that in mind. Okay, it's laying on its side. So now you know that you've got a shadow underneath it. And the darkest shadow is going to be on the top left-hand side and underneath. And as you come up, you take your finger and you get the basic shading. And then when you get the basic shading, keep in mind that you've got the shading from each object on the ground, which is called the cast shadow. Now this shadow may go behind this apple, or if it were in front, it would go on the apple. Doesn't really make any difference. This one will have a shadow right here. And before you know it, you have a whole bunch of apples laying in different directions, and your painting becomes more interesting because you now have learned how to create interesting forms without having to go with all the struggle of erasing over and over. If this were an actual painting, I can see it already. Most of you get the background painted and you feel good and you just paint this bucket over and over and over because you did know how to draw it in the first place. Now you can draw it with your brush, okay? By learning to use charcoal first, you control it, then you can do it with your brush, okay? Well, as usual, we're running out of time. I just want to make a couple more comments about basic drawing. Basic drawing is for everyone. You don't have to become a painter once you learn the basic draw. You can use it for commercial art, fashion illustration, any of the art forms that you would like. But let me show you quickly one more thing, and then we're going to have to go. When you're doing your drawings, I can't stress enough the fact that you learn to use thick and thin, light pressure, heavy pressure at the beginning. As you come down, lighten the pressure, turning your charcoal sideways to learn how to create the different pressures. Okay? This is a wonderful exercise, something you should really practice on. Go from top to bottom, bottom to top. Learn all the basics. You'll have a lot of fun with drawing. God bless you. Thanks for joining us today on the Inspiration of Painting, and we'll see you next time.